And we're back. We're back with Jon Fishman, drummer of the band Phish. One thing I don't have you on here saying, which might be interesting, is if you want to kind of briefly say what happened to your family.
We were moving a lot back and forth between Maine and Vermont, and I can't, I don't remember exactly at what point we were in a move at that moment. Let's see, Freddie was born in 2013, and so I think it was like early 14. It was like his 6-month pediatrician checkup. We hadn't established a new pediatrician in Maine yet. We were over in Vermont visiting, and I think we took him to his old pediatricians there, who we really loved. I can't even remember what the measurement stuff is anymore, Tamara, but it was like...
He had a 5 micrograms per deciliter, if I remember correctly.
Okay, yeah. I knew it had a 5 in it, but I couldn't remember it was 0.5.
I want to say, wait, before you talk anymore, I just want to say we're laughing. Like, I'm laughing because I remember what your son's blood level is, but you don't. But it's not funny that he had a blood level, but it's just kind of funny that these are the details I remember about the families that I work with. Is I remember their kids' names, I remember the blood level, I remember where I was when I was talking to them. And it's kind of an interesting database in my head of all these stories. And anyway, go on.
So he had a 5, and we were like, wow, this is where could this possibly be coming from? Because the farmhouse that we had in Maine, we were told, even though it was an old home, was lead-free. I mean, that's what we were told, and that's what we went on. And so we were a little mystified, like, where could this be coming from? And we got it tested, and it turned out that he liked to crawl into the fireplace all the time. The paint around the hearth had lead, and we didn't know if he would have been licking it or but it was a little chip. That's when we got out of there, and we actually went back to a house in Vermont that we had not sold yet. It was on the market. We actually moved back in until we could get the lead remediated. But then, I mean, you came into our life somewhere around when did you come into the picture?
I believe that it was February of 2015, around Valentine's Day.
Well, what I was going to say was it was after running into you, and then you come into our house and measuring things, and that where we realized, like, let's say Lily had been exposed when she was the same age as Fred, but that wouldn't necessarily show up in her, when she was 5 or 6 years old. My ex-wife's aunt had an old, like a dollhouse, store. They sold like classic old doll stuff, and we got like 2 different buildings from her at one point, a whole bunch of figurines and a whole bunch of stuff. And I remember you testing that dollhouse, and that thing was loaded. That had the highest lead content of anything in the house, other than the little 3-bay dish.
I remember
dish that was 70-some% lead that I ate out of as a kid. That was like my favorite dish that I ate, like applesauce and everything out of that fucking thing. So yeah, that's why that explains a lot. But that dollhouse was like, I thought, well, Lily probably, I'm willing to bet that all of our kids got some exposure to it that we actually didn't really know until maybe Freddie.
You told me that the low threshold of detection in Vermont at the time was 5. Because Freddie tested at like 5 or 5.1 or whatever it was, he was just above the threshold that you got the alert. Or I forget exactly. It was like...
Yeah, no. It was because we did it in Vermont that we got the alert. Because in Maine, the threshold was higher. It was like 10 or 20 or something.
Yeah.
Probably the other kids had gotten tested in Maine or whatever it was. We never had it come up with any of the other kids. It just happened to come up with Freddie because the threshold was lower in Vermont.
And so that's all messed up, like all these different
all the states have different thresholds. Yeah, whatever state you live in, like definitely find out what their threshold for pediatric, lead levels is, because if it's, 10, you might not even be told.
So a simple question, Rena asked, what would you want other parents to know? What would you say to someone who hasn't been receptive to learning about lead hazard?
I guess I would say this, to people out there that they've got a structure that they are going to remediate the lead from. Even with our eyes open and fully prepared and armed with the right questions to ask and the right asks to make of the services that we hired, we still got completely half-assed. Even though we talked to the lead remediation guy and said, listen, we want to make sure we remove 100%, and we realize it'll cost extra to do that, but we do really want to do it. And he goes, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll do that. We weren't here to actually look over these people's shoulder, and as a result, it was real. I remember this really kind of bad moment where we were coming to see the end result, and I was walking into the house, and the inspector guy and the guy that owned the remediation company greeted each other like they were brothers. They're like kind of, hey man, how you doing? High five, gave each other a hug. Good to see you. Blah, 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 small talk. And I just remember thinking to myself, fuck, I wonder, I hope this isn't like, the right hand's feeding the left hand thing. Like we're just this thing. And it was. There were entire rooms where there was lead in the walls and the paint where they didn't remove it. And I remember standing in the little living room of our house with the guy with the gun in his hand and with the remediation service and say, how could you have missed this entire room? Like, how did this happen? And they all were like, yeah. And the guy did sort of admittedly kind of look down at the floor and he was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how I did that. But then at the end of the day, instead of making it right, instead of being like, yeah, we totally had that conversation and we'll come back and make it right, he just pointed to the small print and said, well, our only obligation really is to only get the 60% or whatever. So fuck you, basically. I mean, that's what happened, And so I would encourage anyone out there that's going to do it to be there, when they go through and they document where the lead is in your house. You got to be there. I think that there's a lot of scam to the whole thing. I mean, they did remove some of the lead, but they're really only going to do what they're required to do. And as we know, as I've learned from you and as I know now from speaking to, our pediatricians when our son had low levels of lead in him, that really small amounts go a long way in the damage they create. And, this idea of acceptable levels, by state standards, I mean, the state acceptable levels are just fucking ridiculous. It's not even, you can't, I mean, it's like the standards are sort of like, it's like, the acceptable standard for holding your hand over an open flame being 10 seconds, you know what I mean? Like, that'll burn the flesh off you for sure. But, beyond that, it could be lethal, but up to 10 seconds, you're only talking about third-degree burns. I mean, it's like that kind of reasoning.
Well, and so what I was wanting to share with you was something really exciting happened from a legislative perspective this week, but it also sucks. The threshold for lead in dust that is considered unsafe for families is has been anything 40 micrograms per square foot or more on a horizontal surface like floors. And they've just officially lowered that level to 10 micrograms per square foot this week.
Wow.
But if you recall, in my film, in footage that was filmed in 2012, Dr. Bruce Landfield says that in the 90s, his recommendation to the EPA was that the threshold for dust should be 5. And so still in 2020, 30 years later, they finally lower it to 10, but not to 5.
It's like, what's the point? Why not just go to the 5? Like, what is it with the, nickel and diming, like lead dust amounts? It's just, it just shows that that there's this wrestling match between, powers that are more concerned with, our safety versus powers that are concerned with not having to be accountable and money and all kinds of other things that shouldn't be the primary interest.
Yeah.
It's not one thing, it's another. But the lead thing is really catching up because all of that stuff that you said, like got painted in the 40s, is all the stuff that's disintegrating everywhere now, and that's why it's so relevant, I think, at this particular point in history, and has been for at least the duration of the time you've been doing this work, for sure.
And that was part 2 of the 10 Minutes with Tamara interview with Jon Fishman. We've actually decided to cut a third video out of this, so please do check back here at leadsafemama.com, tamararubin.com. Thanks for being here, and thanks for tuning in.